Hello, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 3. I'm still unemployed. That's your life update for this week. And today, I don't have as many topics to talk about, so it might not be quite as long as episode 2, which might be for the best because the drop off in views was quite substantial between episodes 1 and 2, so maybe people can handle just over 30 minutes, but maybe 40's pushing it a bit, so experimentation. Let's do this. Today, the topics I'm going to be talking about are one that I previously recorded, which will look a little bit different because I recorded it a few days ago when I watched American History X for the first time, and I wanted to talk about that in a relatively in-depth way because I really liked it and it really affected me, so that'll be later on in the episode, might even be the last thing of the episode. But the other topics I've got are the Eminem and Snoop Dogg VMA performance that I'm going to be talking about because I have some thoughts. The Last of Us remake that just came out. I've been playing that, so a little bit of an update on what I think about that as well. The Spider-Man No Way Home re-release and what I think of that as well. And then we're going to talk about my problem with the episodic format of television, because I've been trying to watch the TV show Hannibal over the last couple of weeks, and as much as I try, I can't get into it. And I figured out exactly why. So those are the topics for today. Let's get right into the first one, which is the VMA performance by Eminem and Snoop Dogg. This performance was very, very odd for a couple of reasons. So we heard a couple of days before the VMAs were set to happen that it was going to be inspired by the metaverse, the performance, and I think everybody, including their grandma, face-palmed and went, "Oh God, please no." And then it turned out to be worse than I think anyone thought it was going to be. So you have Eminem and Snoop Dogg sitting on a couch at the beginning doing a little bit of talking, and then it goes into a horribly rendered animation rather than them actually performing on stage. And the most annoying part about it wasn't like they were playing the backing track over an animation either. There's backstage footage of Eminem rapping. His performance rapping wise live was very good, but you don't get to see him do it apart from the chorus at the end, which had a backing track behind it. It's just baffling to me why they decided to do this. I really don't get it, because you're not seeing them perform. The only footage of seeing them actually perform is backstage footage, and they're acting like it's a genuine performance. Eminem's doing all the hand movements and walking around and giving it his all when he's actually rapping, but the animation is fucking jarring. The animation is terrible for the performance, and it just makes you go, what the hell are these people on when they're thinking of these types of performances? I know Snoop Dogg's really big into the whole NFT metaverse thing. He collects NFTs, and he's been dropping NFT projects as of late. Why? If this is the future of where music's going to go, I don't want to be a part of it, because this performance was dreadful. Animation wise, the idea behind it is kind of stupid. That's the other thing I don't get. So you could have had them both on stage rapping for the most part, and then switched around, had the cool animated backgrounds or whatever, and then have them appear as their bored ape figures for a little bit if you really wanted to. But the other thing I don't get is that they're fully animated not only as their bored ape avatars, but also as themselves. But at least Eminem is actually rapping his part behind the scenes, so why not just have him out on stage and then disappear behind the stage and then replace him with an animation for like 10-15 seconds and then bring him back out? I don't think it was very well thought out. I don't like it. Everyone online has sort of swept it under the rug because I don't really want to be associated with it, because it sucked. It really did. There's no other way of putting it. There's no way of sugarcoating it. The song itself, I know quite a few people hate on it simply because, oh, it's got Eminem in it, and a lot of people hate him for various reasons which I don't agree with. But I don't hate the song. I don't love it, but it's not a bad song. So it's the first time it's being played live as well. But it doesn't really feel like it because you've got this janky ass PS2 graphic on the stage the entire time. What's the point? What was the point of doing it? It's a very slippery and dangerous slope the more the NFT stuff is shoved down our throats and metaverse related stuff is shoved down our throats, the more I feel like most people are getting turned off from music because they can't even be excited anymore because the music will come out and it might even be an NFT that they can't purchase or listen to on Spotify or anything like that. It happened with 2 Snoop Dogg albums, I believe. The NFT drops and then the Mount Westmore album that a few people were looking forward to, myself included, came and went. That's another thing with music in general, actually, in today's climate. You put out an album that you've been waiting for 5 years, give it a week and nobody's talking about it anymore. Like, it seems to be the way things are going. And especially if it's dropped as an NFT only. That needs to fucking stop. Even exclusively for like a week, it needs to stop because it will leak online. I guarantee you some diehard fan will buy the NFT, listen to the album, rip it and put it online for free. You can't stop piracy. It will happen. But anyway, let's talk about something a little bit more upbeat. The Last of Us Remake, which has also been surrounded in a lot of controversy simply because it's been labelled as a remake, but it's really a glorified remaster, which I do agree with. It's basically just a better looking version of the original, again, with a couple of improvements. The AI this time around has been improved quite a lot. I haven't played the original game for a couple of years. I played it just before The Last of Us 2 came out last time, so it's not completely fresh in my memory how the AI acted, but this time they seem a lot more responsive. It's a lot more difficult to sneak up on people. I've had quite a few scenarios in the 4.5 hours I've played so far of thinking I'm going to sneak up on somebody and they turn around last minute, or they spot me out the corner of their eye or something like that and I have to use my bullets. So it's made it a little bit more challenging, which I think is quite good because it's not a particularly hard game anyway. I mean, if you put it on a higher difficulty, of course it is, but I usually play on medium anyway because I don't like too much of a challenge, but it's pretty much the same game. It's one of the best games of all time. There's not really any disputing that. The graphics this time around are pretty spectacular, especially in the cutscenes. The cutscenes look absolutely phenomenal, and I can't praise it enough because it's just a fun game. I will criticise the price point. Here in the UK, it's $64.99 to buy it for a glorified remaster. So I understand why people are sort of boycotting it and not wanting to spend any money on it because it's really expensive, and what you're getting is a game you've already played possibly twice, and that's a little bit scummy on Naughty Dog's part. But if you've got the money, I recommend playing it again. I'd say this is probably the definitive way of playing it. Some of the character models look a little bit different. The way that Tess looks now took some adjusting to, but if you play the game, you know she's only in it for about an hour and a half, possibly 2 hours, depending on how slow you play. So it's not a big deal. I'm trying to think of anything else I can mention really. I like one thing that they brought over from the second game, where sometimes if you shoot a guy like in the leg, he'll get on his knees and then beg for his life. But in my experience so far, people have done that and they've just kept on begging in the second game. They try and pick their weapon back up and try and kill you again. In this game, they don't. I waited around for about a minute. This guy was begging, then he eventually just bled out and died. I was just going to see if he picked his gun back up so I could shoot him, but that didn't happen. There's no going prone to crawl through grass, I mean, to, escape enemies or hide or anything like that, like was in the second game. So what they've actually added to the original game is very, very minuscule, which is a genuine criticism that a lot of people have had, and it's one that I do agree with. But at the end of the day, it is pretty much the exact same game as you have played before, so you can't really downplay it or say that it's a bad game because they haven't changed too much. All they've done is made it look a lot nicer, changed a couple of the character models a little bit to make them more in line with the second game. It's a great game. It is. I'm not playing through it as fast as I would perhaps a new game because I played the game like 3 times before, but I'm enjoying it. Once again, it's one of my favourite games of all time, and I would recommend you play it, but maybe if you are hesitant about the price and you can't quite afford it, definitely wait, because spending the amount of money that I did on a glorified remaster isn't recommended. But then again, I suppose I've kind of aided the problem a little bit by showing them that people will shell out money for this. But we'll see. Again, these first 2 topics I've discussed aren't anything too in-depth. They're mainly just what I've been up to throughout the week, and playing this game since Friday a little bit has been one of the things. So let's move on to the Spider-Man No Way Home re-release. Let me just say right off the bat that this experience in the cinema is the most crowded room I have been in possibly 2.5, 3 years. I am not kidding you. It was packed. That surprised me because I saw No Way Home on day one when it came out, and there was about 10 people in the room. It was a bigger screen. This time around, they sort of did the re-release in one of the smaller screens in the cinema I go to. There's 8, 8 being the smallest, 1 being the biggest, and it was in screen 6. But pretty much every seat was taken. And that surprised me because even though it's not as big as screen 1, which I saw it in the first time around, there was a lot more people in there. And I was actually really surprised. So that's just a nice little tidbit, I guess. The movie itself is the same movie you like. You know, there's a couple added bits, there's a couple of different scene transitions, but there's nothing really worthwhile, I want to say, for you to go see it again. But on Saturday, when I went to watch it, all cinema tickets were about £3.80. So I couldn't really say no to that. It was a nice day out, a nice trip. The things they've added here to the movie don't affect it too much. You've got an extra end credit scene, which I guess sets up the next movie a little bit by showing previous bits from the other movies and Peter Parker's no longer there and sort of how the spell works. I guess that was put in place at the end of the movie. You get like an extra 20 seconds of Matt Murdock, so that was fun because Daredevil's awesome. There was a montage with the Monster Mash song in it, which was just there. There was an extra minute and a half, I think it was, of the 3 Spider-Men interacting just before the final battle. That's probably the main selling point of the things they've added, because even though there's nothing too substantial here, there's a couple of nice chuckle-worthy jokes in there, like one about they're talking about Tobey Maguire's webs and whether or not he just thinks web and it comes out. It's nice to see them interact some more, because that was probably the main selling point and the best part of the movie as a whole the first time around. And sort of Andrew Garfield being like, oh, so it's kind of like riding a bike. That was quite amusing. But again, it's the exact same movie you've already seen. Nothing hinders it. It's just a few extra minutes, couple of extra scenes to a movie that you already liked. As far as I'm aware, they didn't touch up any of the CGI any further, because there were still a few moments, especially in the mirror dimension with Doctor Strange, where the CGI and green screen did not look that good. Again, the CGI suits don't always look good, especially the Iron Spider one, when it just basically disappears off of Peter's body. Same criticisms as I had the first time I saw it. I don't think it's the best Spider-Man movie, but I do still enjoy it quite a lot. The first act, the first hour or so, I'd say, is just enjoyable, and then the last sort of hour and 20 minutes is where the movie really starts to get good. After the Green Goblin fight scene in the apartment is when the movie goes from decent to great in my eyes. I never really loved the first sort of 50 minutes to an hour of this movie. Like I said, I thought it was decent, but for a movie that everyone was hyping up for so long, I expected a little bit more from the first half. But still a pretty good movie. I'd still say it's an 8 out of 10 kind of movie. The last hour and 20 minutes really makes up for the stuff in the first bit that I didn't love so much. So if you want to go see is it called the Super Extra Fun Cut or something like that? You can. I mean, would I tell you to spend full price on it to go see it for the extra content you get? Probably not. But if you can get a discount, or a friend's buying you a ticket and wants to go see it, do it. You know, it's the same movie you've already seen, just with a couple of extra bits, and seeing Matt Murdock for an extra 20 seconds is always good. Now, this is the final topic I'm going to be talking about today, besides my talk about American History X, which is my recent watch of almost the entire first season of Hannibal, and my problem with serialization as a whole. I don't know what it is, but recently, I don't know whether or not it's my depression that's getting to me too much, but I can't enjoy things that much. And I especially can't with TV shows that I try and watch, where every episode is like a different case. Over the years, I've watched many shows that are quite serialized. Supernatural, I watched from about 2010, I think it was. I think the beginning of season 6 is when I started watching it. So I had that in my life for a good handful of years before that ended. I've got the box sets of Buffy and Angel back there, which are incredibly serialized at times, but the actual story episodes and the overarching plot usually engage me quite a lot, especially with Buffy season 5, 2 and 3 as well, and Angel season 2, was it? Yeah, 2 and 5 of Angel were probably the best 2 of that. So I'm no stranger to serialized content, especially when there's multiple episodes a season. Like in those shows, it's about between 22 and 23, I think there is in most seasons. Hannibal, though. Everybody was raving about this show, and I don't get it. I am 11 episodes into season 1, and I get there is still an underlying plot and an underlying theme there. Because at the end of an episode, we have 5 minutes to do further the story a little bit with Will Graham and his mental health deterioration and how he goes crazy and everything going on with him and Hannibal and sort of his plot to, I guess, sort of manipulate Will, pretend that he's his friend. But it's not grabbing me. The whole different murder every week that doesn't have too much to do with the overarching plot doesn't do anything for me. That's my issue. I don't particularly enjoy these shows anymore where you go through 40 minutes of an episode that don't really further the plot forward. It's just an extra killing murder mystery sort of thing, and then you get 5 minutes at the end that furthers the plot. That's not the kind of storytelling I like. I'll use True Detective Season 1, that's a pretty good example of the TV shows that I'm really into. I haven't watched that season in particular for probably about 5 years at this point, but when I first saw it back in 2014 when it came out, when I was a wee 14-year-old lad, edgy, still am edgy, but slightly more so now maybe, and how those 8 episodes, those 8 hours of television, there was no filler. Everything was purposeful, everything led up to a satisfying conclusion, and everything worked. Hannibal has 13 episodes a season, and you'd think with 13 there wouldn't be much room for filler. But in my eyes, maybe I'm reading it wrong, most of what I've seen so far is filler. You got the occasional bit of story, like I said, you got 5, maybe 10 minutes at the end of an episode here or there, but it's not leading to anywhere, really. Maybe, I've heard season 2's better. Maybe I will continue and just see if it does get a little bit more story driven as it goes on, but nothing's really grabbing me with it. Like the acting is pretty great, the writing's good, so it should be right up my alley, but I'm just bored. No matter what I watch now, I'm a little bit bored at points. Like the other day I tried to watch Office Space, the Mike Judge movie, because I heard it was a great comedy. I got 55 minutes in, which, keep in mind the movie's only about an hour and a half long, and I'd chuckled once. I just didn't find it funny. Then I tried to watch something a little bit sillier, because I thought, okay, maybe I'm in a silly mood. I watched Hot Rod, which I did find amusing, but then again I didn't love it too much. So, like I said, I don't know whether or not it's my own mental struggles that are making me not find stuff funny or engaged in dramas as much, but I don't know. My problem with serialization has been around for quite a while. I remember when I was watching Supernatural week to week, and there'd be a really good story-driven episode, you'd be looking forward to what happens next, and then the next 3 are just pointless filler episodes. And it just made me think, why have 23 episodes a season? Just have like 10 or 12. Have maybe 2 filler ones, if it's 12 episodes, and have 10 episodes that are a concise, great story. And it's not like filler episodes can't work. Some of Supernatural's best episodes were filler episodes, like changing channels from season 5, or the Groundhog Day episode from season 3, I think it was, and the it's not called Cabin Fever, Yellow Fever episode from season 4. Stuff like that, they can be really funny and entertaining, but as that series went on, especially after season 5, in my opinion, that show should have ended at season 5. I'm not saying there aren't good seasons afterwards, especially because I did come in as season 6 was starting. But for the most part, the filler episodes don't do anything for me. I don't enjoy them. I'm a very story-driven individual. which is probably why I love shows like Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, and you can probably see the Sons of Anarchy box set back there as well. The amount of filler in those shows is so little, because even an episode that would be considered filler has tons of character development in it, and I don't just mean like 5 minutes of it at the end of an episode. I mean like the entire episode is dedicated to the development of the characters. Every episode develops the characters in some way, which is what I love about TV shows, especially in Breaking Bad. I'd say there's one filler episode in the whole of that show, the Fly episode, which is an episode that I do sort of struggle to get through. It's probably the worst episode of the show, but it's still not bad. Again, it's just Walt and Jesse trapped together for 48 minutes, developing characters and bantering, trying to catch this fly. So you've got to appreciate it for that, making it feel somewhat essential, even though it could be considered filler, which a lot of shows do not know how to do. I haven't rewatched Supernatural. Maybe I'll enjoy some of those filler episodes now because I can binge them or skip certain ones if I want to. I haven't rewatched Angel or Buffy since the beginning of last year, I think it was when I did my binge of Angel. Maybe I'll enjoy some of the more outlandish filler episodes of those too. But again, like with Supernatural, those filler episodes, some of those were genuinely great. It's just, I feel like they bring shows to a grinding halt for the most part. Like I said, some of them can be great, but for the most part, when you got a good story going, you get maybe 1-2 episodes of story. It's really intense, it's really great, and then there's Monster of the Week for 3 weeks. And you might get a tiny reference here or there to the story, like, oh, we got to find this guy, we got to get this. Oh, here's a fucking vampire. It's just, I don't like stuff like that anymore. And nobody's saying I have to watch it, but at one point I did enjoy them a little bit more when I was a little bit younger, and when I started watching Supernatural, me and my family did it. We got the box sets of the first 5 seasons. When season 6 started, went back and started at the beginning. I used to find some of those episodes genuinely scary, like the Bloody Mary episode from season 1. Keep in mind, I was about 10, almost 11 when I started watching it, so I think I can be forgiven. But I don't really have much else to say on the matter. It's just, I've always found it an interesting topic. Serialization, because you've got shows like True Detective, like Sons of Anarchy, like Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul. I'm trying to think of some other examples that don't really have any filler either. Even to a lesser extent, something like Ash vs. Evil Dead, which is more of a comedy show than anything, but 10 episodes a season. Even though there are episodes in there that are less essential, every episode is, again, kind of essential, which makes no sense. It's kind of a contradiction to say that, but if you've seen it, you'll probably know what I mean. It's just, I find it harder to enjoy shows that have a story one episode and then the next there's not really much relevant to it. So those are my thoughts on serialization as a whole and sort of where I stand with TV shows. I've also got Band of Brothers back there I bought. I still need to watch that because apparently that's one of the best shows of all time. I need to find time to do that. Because I've also been ordering the Dragon Ball Super Blu-rays that I don't have. I've now got pretty much all of them. I've got the last 2 coming today, so can finish my binge of that hopefully at some point as well. So past me, would you like to talk about American History X and end this podcast off? So I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I'll do the outro here, but there is one more segment to come in just a second. So enjoy, take care of yourselves, and goodbye. This section of this week's podcast is being recorded a few days earlier than the rest of it, simply for one reason. Last night I finally watched American History X for the first time, and it was amazing. And I have to talk about it right now, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to talk about everything, because I'm bound to forget a couple of details along the way. So this section's being recorded early. This movie is great. If you haven't seen it, I will quickly detail a bit about the plot before we get a bit more in depth about it. So essentially you've got 2 brothers, played by Edward Norton and Edward Furlong, Derek and Danny, and there's 2 plot lines going on essentially. You've got the modern day timeline where Edward Norton comes out of jail as a different person to when he went in there, and he's trying to change his brother's perspective on the whole neo-Nazi lifestyle, because this movie deals with neo-Nazis. Edward Norton is one. and his brother essentially idolizes him, and the dynamic between those two is probably the main center point of the whole movie. The other plot point is in the past. That part's all in black and white. So you've got why Edward Norton's character Derek went to jail. He killed two black people outside of his house. One of them in a really brutal way. He makes the guy bite the curb and curb stomps him. And like, you don't see it in graphic detail, but there's enough implication there for it to still be uncomfortable. And then him going to jail and essentially changing as a person and wanting to do better in his life. The dynamic between the two brothers throughout the movie is really, really interesting too. Because in some of the black and white scenes, you do see Edward Norton acting like a completely horrible, irredeemable person because he's got a swastika tattooed on him. He's going around racially abusing people, going on semi-racist tangents, and the rest of his family isn't really approving of it, but his brother, Edward Furlong, or Danny as his character's called, looks up to him. And the whole movie is essentially about hatred and how living a life of hate is not worth it, and sort of the cycle of violence that comes with being a hateful person. And I thought it was handled absolutely beautifully. Like, I did not think for a second when I started watching this movie that I was going to go from absolutely hating both of these characters to tearing up and actually crying at the end of this movie, because I did. It takes expert writers for you to take these horrible, morally grey people and then do a complete 180 and make you not necessarily forgive them for what they've done, because what they've done cannot be forgiven. The way that they treat people and the way that they act and the violent acts that have been committed cannot be forgiven. But when Edward Norton's character goes to jail and that whole section plays out where he befriends a black guy begrudgingly at first, it takes a few scenes for him to even really say a word to him, but then they laugh together and you can see that sort of hatred fizzle a little bit in Edward Norton. And because he has befriended a black person in prison, his gang that he joined, the other neo-Nazis in the prison, attack him and rape him in a shower. So you see him getting brutalized simply because he was on speaking terms with a black person. And I felt like these scenes were really, really powerful and sort of almost make you feel sorry for Derek, which again is something that I really did not expect to happen. Because earlier on in the movie you see him on a basketball pitch basically being like, oh, you guys get out of here if we win, you never show your faces here again. And then he later on kills a couple of black people as well. And the scene at the dinner table as well with his family, where he's going on a rant not only about immigration, which are right-wing talking points. He goes from being sort of moderately right-wing to really, really exposing himself as a full-blown fascist. And that scene was perfectly done as well. So like I said, it takes some really, really expert writing to make you go from this person's a piece of shit, they deserve death, to, at the end of the movie, almost feeling sorry for him. The redemption arc in the last 45 minutes or so of this movie is amazing. He comes to terms with the fact that his sins cannot be forgiven, but he wants to leave that lifestyle behind, which I think is something that everyone can relate to in some way. Everyone has regrets, everyone's made mistakes. Obviously, what this character's done is a massive mistake, and not a way that anyone should be living their lives, but the themes of wanting to atone for your sins and lead a better life are there throughout, and I feel like that's something that anyone can relate to, which I think is also another interesting talking point, because it also makes you kind of uncomfortable while you're watching it, because you see this horrible person go through this change, coming out of prison, wanting nothing to do with the lifestyle and wanting to change his brother who idolizes him's viewpoints so that he doesn't follow the same path as him. And it makes the viewers pretty uncomfortable because you don't want to relate to this guy, but towards the end of the movie you kind of can't help but see sort of where he's coming from now in the sense that he wants to change his life and leave everything negative that he's done behind him. I have to give some serious props to the ending of this movie as well. It pulled the rug from underneath me. I did not expect the ending to happen how it happened. So, again, I've already talked a bit about spoilers. This is a spoiler review. This movie's been out for like 24 years, something like that. So, I'm going to spoil it. I'm allowed, okay? It's been enough time. But essentially, for the last 15-20 minutes or so, you think that maybe Derek's going to die. There are signs that people are going to hunt him down and kill him. And you're kind of worrying for him because, like I mentioned many times before, he's trying to figure his life out and leave all of his negative stuff behind. But he doesn't die. It all culminates in his brother Danny going to school, going to the urinal, turns around, and a black kid shoots him. I wish I was kind of recording my reaction because I was thinking, oh, Edward Norton's gonna die, and it'll be like, oh, cycle of violence, it's all bad, don't follow that lifestyle, and Danny will learn from his mistakes and then lead a better life without his brother around. Nope. That's not what happens at all. He's shot and killed, and Edward Norton's reaction when he finds his brother's dead body in the bathroom is honestly gut-wrenching. Honestly, I was not expecting that. That was masterful. Another really interesting plot point is to do with the father of the family as well. So there is a flashback towards the end of the movie with Derek's father at a table, and Derek's talking to him about what they're learning at school. And then it kind of mirrors the scene earlier in the movie where Derek goes on a racist rant. The father doesn't go on a rant as intense, but he makes his opinions very well known, and it sort of implies that racism is taught. No one is born inherently racist. It's sort of passed down to generations, and I really, really liked that aspect as well. I liked that they touched on that because it shows that after Derek's dad is killed, it's said earlier in the movie he's killed by a black guy, and that's the turning point for Derek, really, where he basically hears what his father's been feeding him over these dinner table conversations and makes his entire life about it. So in a way it is kind of a tragedy. No, it's not kind of a tragedy, it is a tragedy. It results in the younger brother being killed at the end, and because of his father's death, Derek hates black people and turns to this life of being a neo-Nazi because of tragic events in his life. And I love how the movie doesn't really show you too much of what Derek was like before he became this way, but there's enough in there in that dinner table scene towards the end of the movie where you get an idea that he wasn't really, he wasn't like a model citizen, he wasn't a straight A student or anything, but he wasn't radicalized yet. And how the movie spends little time but uses that little time very, very effectively to make you understand and sympathize with him a little bit more. The movie's almost split into two sections. It's 2 hours long. The first hour is basically, this guy is a horrible person. His younger brother is slowly approaching that level of horribleness. He hasn't really acted out in any violent ways yet, but again, he idolizes his brother and he wants to be just like him to make him proud. And the second half is making you really sort of put everything into perspective and make you almost side with Derek because you want him to change his brother's mind. There's even a really powerful scene where they've had a long chat and Derek tells Danny about his time in jail and everything that happened to him, and they go home and they rip down all of the Hitler and Nazi memorabilia from their room, and that's a really powerful scene as well because they're just ripping all these posters down, throwing them away, and the brothers are sort of one again. They're on the same page because there was a bit of conflict slightly earlier in the movie where they go to, I guess it's a rally, there's Nazi metal concerts going on, and the Derek eventually beats up half to death the leader of the group as well, and everyone's turning against him, saying that he's a lover of black people. That's how I'll say it because I'm not going to say actually what they call him. His girlfriend turns against him. I really like the scene as well where Edward Norton sits down with his character's girlfriend and tries to convince her to leave this life behind with him, and she's not having any of it. I really like the fact that he obviously really, really loved her and wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, but he wanted to get her away from this lifestyle as well, and he tried, but she completely turned on him as well. It's just the last hour of this movie is really, really interesting. I really liked the first hour, but the second hour I think is practically perfect in my eyes. There's not really anything I would have changed about the last hour of this movie. Just all the character decisions they made, from the little interaction between, I can't remember the black guy that he befriends' name in prison, but the little interaction before Edward Norton leaves the jail, and they have sort of like a little fist bump, and you can tell that there's some mutual respect there, and just everything from that small 1 minute interaction to the last couple of minutes of the movie with a monologue from Danny about hate and letting it go, and sort of where it all leads to, and seeing that he dies as well. It's just masterful, honestly. I could probably go on about this movie for a lot longer, but not without scripting it out a little bit more, because I feel like I'm repeating some of my points. But this movie it's great. It might even be in maybe my top 15 movies of all time. It's probably up there with the Scott Pilgrims, the Dark Knights, the Pulp Fictions, Superbad. It's got to be somewhere within the top 15. I like it more than Saving Private Ryan that I saw the other day. This is the best movie I've seen in quite a while. I happily give it like a 9 out of 10. This movie is great.